how to feel satisfied with less food. The quickest variable that affects weight isn't how much you exercise, it is how much food you're consuming. So the quickest way to lose weight is just to reduce the food intake, but that's not the easiest way. So it's a lot easier to go and walk and do more training and exercise, and people find that as an option a lot easier than actually reducing the food intake. Because, and you'll see over the next couple of slides, the transition to eating less food, it is a change physiologically in the body, and in the initial stages the body doesn't really like it that much. Okay? When you consume a certain quantity of food, the body gets used to that and it kind of shifts all its parameters to expect that. So when you change something, it doesn't really like it to begin with. Okay? And a lot of the time people can give up on the idea of it and feel, oh, this is too hard. And it's purely because the way that they're trying to reduce their food intake isn't the correct way. So I'm going to teach you a little bit about understanding what makes you feel full, what affects that, and what are the things that you can do to actually make that feel better so that you can reduce your quantities so that ultimately we can shift the weight. And not only shift the weight, food intake, not only shift the weight, but also the process of digestion. A lot of you have probably heard me say it before. The process of digestion is actually quite burdensome to the body. It takes a big toll on the body. It creates toxins, it uses up a lot of energy. And so if we're going to reduce our intake, I find that when I ask members to do that, they will report all these increased levels of energy. And it's purely because all of a sudden the body can do something else outside of purely digesting food. It can work on healing and repair rather than just churning all this food over. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And in particular, it's the quantity of food rather than the choices. And that's not to say to go and eat small quantities of McDonald's, but actually would work, unfortunately. If you ate small enough quantities, it's not going to lead to great health, but you still will lose the weight. The reality is that when we reduce quantities, we still will lose the weight. Because if there's still a calorie deficit, regardless of where the food comes from, you still will lose weight. However, making poor options is not feeding the body, and so your health will deteriorate. So that's not the solution, but we are going to talk about how to reduce quantities of food. So what happens when you actually start to eat less? Why does this help with weight loss, and how does it make us feel? So the first thing, and we're going to talk about stomach distension. It's a function of the body. Now, for those of you that have heard me speak before, you know I'm fascinated by the human body and what it actually does do. It's extraordinary if we just knew a little bit more about it and how it worked. So when you are hungry, and we'll talk about this in the next couple of slides, when you start to feel hunger, one of the reasons that signals that feeling of hunger is that the stomach shrinks down to a certain size. When the stomach shrinks down to a certain size, the stomach has receptors on the outside of the stomach that registers and says, okay, we're shrunk to a certain point, I need food. And it sends a message to the brain. The reverse of that too is that as the stomach starts to distend and increase in size, what it does is those receptors also send a message to the brain to say, you've had enough food, stop now. What happens though of years and years of overeating, and that overeating can sometimes start when we're little, and our parents tell us to finish everything on the plate, even when we're done. What happens to that mechanism is that we switch it off. The brain is very clever, and our bodies are extraordinary in terms of they're geared up for survival. So when we stop listening to that mechanism, the body goes, well, I don't really need that anymore. I can switch that part of the brain off because they're not responding to that. Okay? So we lose that connection. We can regain that connection, absolutely. But over years and years of consuming more food than what we actually need, the stomach does actually physically increase in size. So therefore, more food is required to trigger the distension and that fullness. And as we go, we increase the stomach size more and more. So then all of a sudden, when you've decided that you're going to reduce your food quantities because you're wanting to lose some weight. If you can imagine, if I got my little pointer there, if you can imagine if you've decided now to fill your stomach up to this much food rather than really filling it up as you probably normally would, the body's going to go, I haven't had enough food yet, I'm still hungry, I'm still hungry, I'm still hungry, I'm still hungry, like continuously. So that's the bad news about overeating over years and years and years. The good news is that as you start to decrease the quantities, even though the body will whinge and complain, and we'll try and reduce that noise today with the techniques that I'll teach you, in 4 to 5 weeks' time, you actually can reduce. That stomach actually does, it's quite pliable, okay? So what it does is it will actually shrink back in size. You can actually do it. It's not like stretched skin that doesn't go back. It actually does reduce in size, which then basically means that the quantity that you're consuming here, is going to be a lot less, which is going to give you that feeling of satisfaction, okay? So that's the exciting news. Is that exciting news? Yes, because we can do something about it. So, and this happens in 4 to 5 weeks. And I see those reports because I see clients after I've reassessed them in 6 weeks' time, and they'll say things like, yeah, I'm just eating a lot less and I don't even feel like it anymore. So that's the first thing that we want to focus on. The body also becomes more efficient at extracting nutrients from less food. Because when you've got a whole abundance of food, it becomes quite lazy in its uptake because the food's always there. So it just grabs the most obvious sources and it just stores the rest because I don't want to deal with this, there's this abundant supply. So the body becomes more efficient at extracting the nutrients that it needs from less food, which is really exciting. It means that it heightens your system and your system works a lot more efficiently and healthier. The other thing that happens is your body doesn't have to store food. So you stop putting on weight and then you actually start losing it, okay, when we're consuming less. So before eating less though, we need to understand the concept of satiety, and that's that feeling of feeling satisfied. Not only feeling satisfied like, wow, that was a really nice meal, but it's that feeling like I've had enough, okay? And there's a clear distinction between I've had enough and that was too much, undo the top button, roll over, it's Christmas Day, right? A process of satiety, which is the body's inbuilt mechanism that tells you when you have had enough food. You don't need calorie counting. You don't need any other program. You don't need to weigh and measure your food. You just need to connect with that inbuilt mechanism of satiety. Okay? And when you connect with that, and then you start listening to your hunger, all the weight issues disappear. Okay? But it's a journey to get to that point because the body will tell you when it's hungry and it will tell you exactly when you've had enough food to eat. Okay? So the way that satiety is triggered is there's a number of ways. One I just explained to you, which was that stomach distension. I said there's receptors all around the tummy that send a message to the brain. But with that one, which is that point number 2, that process takes about 20 minutes. Okay? So that's why we talk about eating slowly, and that's one of the strategies for tonight. Because if you're hungry or you're rushing and you sit down to a meal and you're inhaling, like I unfortunately sometimes do, then you will consume more. And in the moment, it's feeling good, you're filling the gap. And then 10 minutes later after you've finished, it's like, oh, I wish I hadn't had that much. That was too much. That's because that mechanism of satiety, the body's registered, but it does, that communication takes a little while. So when we talk about chewing our food and eating slowly, it actually really is important. So the first way that is triggered also is through a sensory experience. So when we look at our food, the anticipation of that starts to send off those hormones and trigger those hormones that feel satisfied with food. So the more beautiful it looks, the more beautifully presented, and I'm not talking about MasterChef sort of, but if you're putting it chopped up and it looks fresh and it's colourful, your body immediately is feeling satisfied because it can see that there's something coming. Taste. So taking the time to really chew your food and experience it rather than, sort of chewing twice and swallowing big chunks of food. The longer you keep it in your mouth, the actual better taste that you get out of your food, because it starts to digest in your mouth and you can start to experience it differently. And also the smell of food. So take the time to actually smell your food, look at your food, chew your food. All these things actually do have an impact. So that's why when we're sitting in front of a TV, which is again one of the other points, we're not looking at the food. We're barely even taking the time, we're distracted. So you can eat a lot more food while sitting in front of a TV than by actually sitting facing your meal in a quiet environment or at a table. So one of your personal rules, and you can start to write some of these points down as action points if you're not doing them, is making sure you commit to paying attention when you're actually eating and being mindful of your food. Okay, so some of the strategies to feel hungry with less food to make weight loss easier. The first one is increase your water intake, because we've heard it time and time again. We do get that the feeling of hunger and the feeling of thirst, if you're not clear on those two signals, they can be confused. So there can be times where you're actually thirsty and you misunderstand that signal from your body to think that you're actually hungry. So the first thing to do is make sure that you're getting adequate hydration throughout the day. And if you are unsure, have a cup of water and just wait. Because the feeling of hunger as we go, it actually increases in intensity. It doesn't go away. And that's another quick tip of how to tell whether you're experiencing an emotional hunger or whether you're actually experiencing a physiological hunger. Because if you're really craving something, you feel like, oh, I really have to have that, and it's probably because you're angry, sad, or any of those emotions, if you give that 5 minutes, it does dissipate. That feeling goes. But that craving, that emotion, if you imagine, it's very similar to a wave coming up on a beach. It comes up really high and it gets quite intense. But if we just ride the wave and just wait, it just floats back and it disappears, and you're like, oh, that wasn't even hungry. And you actually can see yourself on the other side of a craving if you just really hold still and just wait. You can't see yourself on the other side of hunger. It magnifies. It gets worse. Okay? So if you feel that you do a bit of emotional eating or you're unsure, that's a really good test. Wait 5-10 minutes, see what happens. Okay? So we do not want to confuse thirst and hunger. So the first thing is increase your water intake. The second thing is to add protein to each of your meals. So I'm going to flick back to that slide that I was talking about before. So this slide here is, it just shows you, I don't know if you can see the things down the bottom there, it shows you the impact on your sugar levels, which basically is the other way that the body registers if it's hungry or not, is depending on what your sugar levels are doing. If your sugar levels dip really low, your body will send a signal to your brain that you're hungry again. Different foods have different impact on sugar levels. This yellow one, as you can see, it has a huge spike. That's Coca-Cola. Okay, so basically the minute that you drink Coca-Cola, it floods your blood sugar levels, and then what happens is the insulin, because it's so much, the insulin goes panic mode, I don't like this, I'm removing all this sugar down, and look what happens. It dumps it back down under the line where the body says, I'm hungry again, within 60 minutes. So what happens then? Guess what? You're hungry again. So you might have a sugary biscuit, you're back up here again. Guess what? You're hungry again. And that's the game that a lot of people don't realise that they're playing. Whereas this one here is salmon. It dips at the start purely because the body actually uses up energy to digest it. So anything that contains protein and that contains fat takes the body longer to digest it, and the release of the sugar into the bloodstream is slower. That's why we say that things leave you feeling fuller for longer. So basically you eat the salmon here, and it isn't until about, 2 hours later, and that still continues on for a bit longer, that your blood sugar levels Well, they're quite stable here and then they start to go down. So it isn't until about the 3 hours later that after eating salmon, you feel hungry again. So that's why having protein at each of the meals is really important. If you think about, say, an almond in comparison to a lollipop, the lollipop is digesting in your gut, in your cheeks and just flooding your bloodstream. So when you eat things that have got more nutrients in it, it is going to take longer to digest that food, which means that you can feel fuller for longer, which means you eat less food. Okay, so and eating protein, if it's not something that you're doing at each of your meals, it is something that absolutely reduces your hunger because the body just takes longer to digest it. Eating slowly. We mentioned this one already. The eating slowly is all about giving your body the time to register that it actually has had enough. So if you're a fast eater, write that one down. You need to really change that. The next one is chewing your food. And the reason being is that when you chew your food, you're breaking it up into little pieces. The body can digest it and it can give the nutrients to your body a lot quicker. So therefore, you start to get that uptake of nutrients and the body says, yeah, I've had enough. Whereas if you're swallowing big chunks of food, it takes the body a long time to digest that food, so you feel that you actually need more food. So chewing your food is absolutely essential. The next one, making sure you're serving up your food. Avoid eating out of a packet. This is an obvious one, but we do it all the time. I grabbed some almonds. I hear it all the time. People say to me, I've got almonds at the desk and I just, have as many as I want. I'm like, no. So make sure you serve up the portion. The next one, which we spoke about again already, is avoiding distractions when you're eating. Things such as TV. There was this fabulous study that put people with pizza in front of the TV and just let them just eat, and they on average ate 5 to 7 pieces of pizza. When they were sat down at a table and they were actually paying attention, they only ate between 3 and 5 slices of pizza. So that's a substantial difference. So eating distracted in front of a screen or in front of a TV always leads to you consuming more. So that's another tip to make sure that you're doing. This is one of my favourite things. This is thinking about low energy and low energy density foods and high nutrient density. So what we want to do is we want to avoid foods that are empty calories, like the sarkata. It gives you some carbohydrate, but it doesn't give you anything else. So at 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, if you grab the sarkatas and you eat them, in a packet, you're getting 84.9 grams of carbohydrate, and in 100 grams of sunflower seeds, which you probably couldn't physically eat in one serving, you're only going to get 2.2 grams of carbohydrate in there. But look at all the different nutrients that you're going to get. So by you eating, say, some sarkata with some hummus, there's so many nutrients in the chickpeas that you're going to eat less because the body will start, you're actually feeding yourself. When you do things like eating sarkatas, potato chips, all of those foods, they've got very minimal nutrients. So you can eat those and then the body's like, well, that was awesome. It raises your blood sugar levels, doesn't give you anything else, and your body's like, but I needed that vitamin and that nutrient for healing and repair, and the kidneys are a bit low in this and the heart's a bit low in this, and you've just given me carbohydrate. Hang on a tick, I need to send the hunger signal again. So the body will always send the signal for hunger when it needs something that you haven't given it. So by eating foods that are higher in nutrient density, you're going to combat that. So simple strategies that you can do with that, rather than having porridge on its own, add some blueberries in there, sprinkle it with seeds, add some yogurt over the top. Rather than just having an apple, add almonds with it. Okay, so at every meal you want to increase the nutritional value of what you're actually eating. Out of those things, which ones are you not doing? I'm hoping you've written some down. Oh, that's it for that. I'm going to quickly skim through them again. So making sure you're getting enough water, making sure you're getting protein at each of your meals, making sure you're eating slowly, making sure you're chewing your food, Making sure you're serving up your food and avoiding eating out of the packet, or even that could be serving on a smaller plate. Making sure there's no distractions when you're eating. All of these things, they're so simple, but when you actually start to do them, they have a huge impact. Making sure that you eat things that are nutrient dense. I even do things like swap lettuce for spinach. Okay, because lettuce has got minimal nutrients. Spinach has got iron in it. It's got so much more nutrients than what lettuce on its own has. So doing simple little things like that.